the institution of the United States Supreme Court should always be held to the highest steps of integrity. And to not have the leaker identified, I think it sets a terrible precedent. I hope they will continue to be very diligent and look for the leaker.
So that right there was Mississippi Attorney General Lynn Fitch, who brought the Dobbs case to the Supreme Court, succeeded in getting Roe struck down. Talking to Newsmax's Kilmany Dukart there at the recent March for Life rally. Cold day, by the way, in D.C. that day. It's been months and months of so-called investigation, and we say that lightly because, or not lightly, because the investigation happened, again, inside the building. So who leaked that Dobbs decision in the Supreme Court? Will we find out? Yeah,
we still don't know. Monday regulars Joe diGenova, Victoria Tunsing back with us now. The Supreme Court marshal was tapped with investigating, and we didn't get an answer. So what happens next?
Well, you can tell that that woman expects, the AG expects to be arguing before the Supreme Court again because she was so polite. I hope they continue their diligence. They were not diligent. They didn't even have a serious investigation.
I would say that this was not a thorough investigation. While I'm sure that the marshal of the court, Ms. Curley, did a very fine job by her standards. This was not conducted the way you would conduct a professional leak investigation. You would have all cell phone records. You would use geolocation data to find out where people go. You would be able to get the phone records of the journalists, because that has been done by the Justice Department many times in the last few years. None of that was done.
Or a polygraph.
There were no subpoenas issued. There were no polygraphs. This could not possibly end other than the way it did. And I'm not sure they really wanted to find out.
Joe and I are old enough to remember when John Roberts, because they wanted to continue eating lunch in D.C. with buddies, changed his opinion mid-sentence, right 2 days before the Obamacare Act was upheld. You read that opinion and you know that he was going to turn it down. He was not going to uphold it. And all of a sudden, he changes his mind. And we were with certain justices right after that opinion, and they were furious with him. He all of a sudden, he said, oh, it's a tax, when the Justice Department had not even argued that it was a tax. So he wants to uphold the dignity of the institution as opposed to getting justice done.
So Senator Ted Cruz, which we have a soundbite of, Senator Ted Cruz recently spoke about this, about the leak, the investigation. He has his thoughts on it. Here's that.
It is likely to be someone who is a hard partisan and who was willing to burn the place down because he or she was so upset about what happens. If I were to guess, the most likely justice for whom the law clerk is clerking is Sonia Sotomayor.
Okay, so he threw his obvious opinions out there, but here's what we know. We know that the clerks were interviewed. I think there were 90 different interviews, something like that. The clerks were interviewed, and then it was confirmed that even the justices were interviewed as part of this investigation as well. And it was determined that neither the clerks nor the justices had anything to do with this.
Oh, John, stop.
Well,
I got to give you the facts. You can give me your opinions. Go ahead.
There were 100 interviews. There were 100 people interviewed, and there were 125 interviews. My guess is that the justices were not interviewed the way the law clerks were. And indeed, we were told that the justices were allowed to ask questions back. This sounds like the famous interview of Hillary Clinton by the FBI, where nothing was asked and nothing was answered. I just think it's pretty clear that if you want to get at this, you have to have the tools available to gather data, telephone records, telephone location data from cell phones, so you can match up where a reporter might have been, where a clerk might have been. So the fact that Senator Cruz mentioned Sotomayor, she has been mentioned numerous times by other people because of the vitriol she has visited upon the court from the bench during oral argument. She has chastised the court and called it some pretty ugly names after the Dobbs decision. So, we shall see. Maybe the court will, get the gumption to do it right, but it looks like that's not going to happen.
But here's the bottom line. Unless you're willing to give people polygraphs or exercise subpoenas, you don't have a serious investigation.
Yeah, we also learned from the interviews that some who'd been interviewed admitted to maybe discussing the draft opinion with the spouse or a partner. So then that kind of opens it up as to whether that could have been relayed to friends or, it's a big question there. You're shaking your head? No?
Yes, because this is the whole...
It's a bigger investigation.
I mean, is it different than I come home and say to Joe, hey, I think this Roe is going to be overturned? You don't have the whole opinion. The spouse would not have the ability to give off the whole opinion. So just saying, oh, I told my husband how it was going to be is a very different thing than giving every single word of a draft opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And it ended up being the final opinion that came out. Right. So it was a preview of what ended up being the Alito draft opinion. And that led to a lot of what we saw over the summer months as violence, in some cases, against pro-pregnancy centers. We had seen protests outside the Supreme Court justices' homes. The allegations that perhaps the draft opinion led to some of this violence that we saw take place because people were motivated by what was in the draft. Do you know if anything within the Supreme Court will change when it comes to communicating these draft versions of opinions because of the leak?
Yes, we're being told that they're instituting new rules with regard to distribution of drafts. They are adopting apparently some technology changes and other things which did not exist prior to this time, which, by the way, that falls at the feet of the Chief Justice. There's no way there should be horse and buggy technology at the United States Supreme Court. And they've learned a very valuable lesson at a very terrible price. So apparently there are going to be technology changes, rules changes, access changes, et cetera, et cetera. A little too late, unfortunately, for the court.
Yes, because they've left an awful message here. You can get away with it because they're not going to be serious about an investigation.
Yeah, and I believe I was looking too this morning. I was trying to actually find it so I could source it for you. But there was an article out that came out this morning that there were even protesters that opposed the March for Life event outside, again, yet another Supreme Court justice's home by another activist organization, a pro-abortion group. This happened in front of Brett Kavanaugh's home yet again.
Yes.
You saw that as well. What can be put in place? Are there not federal regulations, federal laws against something like this?
Well, of course. And in fact, Merrick Garland has refused to enforce the federal law that already exists. Those demonstrations in front of the justices' homes, which were designed to get them to change their opinion before the Dobbs decision was ultimately answered, are criminal violations. But the United States attorneys in those districts, who were all appointed by Biden, and Garland did nothing. I think Merrick Garland is really a disgraceful example of how a United States Attorney General should act. He has been an embarrassment on many things, but this one issue, after a threat to a Supreme Court justice and an assassination attempt, for him to sit silent and do nothing and not prosecute any of these people, absolutely outrageous.
Let's not leave this subject without pointing out that these were all conservative justices where this problems occurred. And I can tell you, if Elena Kagan gets a demonstration, I think the law will be carried out.
Yeah. And let's hope it doesn't get to that point, because no one wants to see violence or protest outside any Supreme Court justice's home. I know you do too. Joe and Victoria, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your time today.
You bet.
Thanks.